I became the dangerous woman. And I no longer do things because I think to myself, I should really do this. I do things because I want to do them. Or I don't do things because I don't want to do them. Get in, losers. We're going lifting. The dangerous woman is the woman who is least likely to be controlled by anyone other than herself. And that's why I refer to myself and other women who are focusing on developing this idea of strong over skinny as dangerous women. Because society has told us we are supposed to be a particular way. We are supposed to be small. We are supposed to prioritize being skinny. And that is something that is being put onto us by other people, not by ourselves. And I think something that is just very scary and threatening to others is being surrounded with other people who do not need to be affirmed by others in order to be their most authentic versions of themselves. And that's really the big notion behind what the dangerous woman is, what that name represents. It's being untamed. It's being uncontrollable. It's being this authentic version of self. It's not supposed to necessarily be anything, scary or threatening. But, if you are somebody who is looking to control other people, especially if you're somebody who is looking to control women, when you encounter somebody that is a dangerous woman, you better be fucking scared, because you're not going to be able to manipulate her into doing whatever it is you want her to do, because she's only controlled by herself. When I think about the younger version of myself, I was not dangerous at all. I was the chameleon. I was the people pleaser. I was the one who didn't want to rock the boat. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know that one of the big things that pushed me into having an eating disorder starting in the 6th grade was being told, Colleen, people will like you more if you were skinny. And that spiraled me down into a really negative place of trying to fit in with what other people wanted from me for a really long time. It took a lot to get to the point of feeling like the only person that can control me is me. And unlocking that tangible skill that is the kettlebell, learning how to become strong physically, is really what allowed me to propel not just as the kettlebell queen, but into this region of, dangerous woman status. Because once I saw what my body was capable of, it made me think, okay, well, maybe I have other actions where I'm capable of more, or maybe I could start to have more of a voice that was able to stand out instead of feeling like I needed to minimize it. But that was hard. And I remember it was, I want to say 4 Christmases ago, and I had a family member who snapped. And this was one of those things that was, the straw that just broke the camel's back. And I was the one that was getting the brunt of this family member snapping. And I remember after this night, and my gosh, we're getting ready for the holidays. So for those of you who have happy family, exciting things, I'm so overjoyed that's what you get to experience. Holidays for me is really kind of a mixed bag. And for anybody, now that we're coming to this season of the year where things might not be super, exciting and Christmas card ready, I just want you to know that I get it. And I think the holidays can bring up a lot of interesting things. And, 4 years ago was really dark. And there's a part of me that's grateful for that darkness, because it is a pivotal moment that allowed me to rise into my dangerous woman. But anyways, I remember at that point 4 years ago feeling so low, and I didn't know what to do. So what did I do? I buried myself in work and I made myself really busy. And I just tried to avoid all of the feelings. And then it was the following Christmas that I had another family member snap on me. And I remember it was like a couple days after Christmas. And you know, when you're just like so emotionally drained that you feel hungover, you know, it's that feeling of just like, I can't function. I'm so low. And you maybe even kind of question, like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I doing here in life? Like, I was that low. And I remember sitting on the couch and just thinking, you know what, Colleen, you get one life. Do you want to spend your life people pleasing for others? Or do you want to please yourself? And it was in that moment where I was like, things need to change. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I get help. And that's really when the whole therapy journey started for me in a bigger way. I remember I met with my first therapist in college, and therapy for me was always kind of like touch and go. But at that point, I was like, I don't know what else to do. And the stuff that I'm going through now is really close to family. And I ended up cutting ties completely with my family. And it was so hard. And I remember feeling like I must be a terrible daughter. Like, who doesn't talk to their family? You know, a terrible daughter, a terrible sister. Like, who would do this? But I had to remove myself from this toxic situation so that I could heal and learn, how do I go through life without people pleasing and living for others and doing things that make my family more comfortable, even if that means betraying myself. So I got my butt into therapy. I started doing a lot of EMDR work. I know we've talked about that on episodes of the podcast in the past, but basically the way my therapist described it to me, this sounds fucking terrible, but it's like the modern day lobotomy. Nobody's actually like getting into your head, but it is this rewiring of how your brain experiences past traumatic experiences. And for me, it was so helpful. And I remember I would have streaks where I would bring up these, situations from the past, because you have to face dark moments in order to get through them. So if you're the kind of person who's like, I don't want to do any of this dark work, then this is probably like not something for you. But in my experience with EMDR, talking about these dark moments ended up being really healing. And in order to heal, you have to feel. So I was doing a lot of feeling, doing a lot of healing, but I think something that we sometimes forget, and this isn't just in mental health work, but this is also in learning how to strength train or learning what it actually takes to develop gorgeous, beautiful muscle, is we can do all of the right things. In therapy, you can get to your session, you can, do the shadow work, you can do all of this stuff. With lifting, you can get into the gym, you can get your reps, you can nail your form, you can track your macros, you can do all of these things. And like when life is pretty calm, it's like, yeah, I'm just doing the thing. And of course I'm progressing. But you want to know what it takes to really understand that you are truly becoming this evolved version of yourself? You have to get back into a storm. You have to get back into chaos so that you can now practice what you have been working on and see if it actually sticks. And for me, I remember getting bombarded with messages from one of my family members, and I would just break down. And I would talk to my therapist about it, and I would be like, what do I do? Like, I'm feeling pulled to go back. I don't want to go back. Like, what am I supposed to do? And every time one of those things would happen, it was terrible in the moment, but looking back, it was fantastic because it was an opportunity to practice. How are you going to set that boundary? How are you going to protect yourself? And it's possible to protect yourself without being a total asshole to other people. And that's something that I had to learn how to do as well. How do you navigate a sense of being calm, a sense of being, kind, being in this mature state, but not letting anybody fuck with you in a way that spirals you back down into, good girl, people pleaser behavior. So it's the same thing when it comes to lifting or nutrition. It's like if you got sick or you went on vacation or you had, a really stressful day and you're not following the plan to a T, what do? Do you just say fuck it and give up? A lot of people do. But what I would encourage you to do instead, or what I have learned is no, you're in it. You practice those pieces that you've been able to work on when there isn't, a chaotic storm going on. And you start to see that these things that you've been working on, they're no longer skills that you're trying to develop. They are just skills that are part of who you be. And in having those opportunities to practice, it allowed me to not just say, I want to go from the good girl people pleaser to the dangerous woman. I became the dangerous woman. And I no longer do things because I think to myself, I should really do this. I do things because I want to do them, or I don't do things because I don't want to do them. And that has been a challenging thing to kind of, figure out, because sometimes that means it's going to impact other people. And again, it kind of comes back to, are you trying to live for others or do you want to live for yourself? And I think some people would think that, you living for you is very selfish. And other people, I think, would believe you get one life and you get choices. What are the choices that you are going to feel good about making, knowing that you have X amount of life potentially ahead of you? And for me, I've just gotten to this point where it's like, I really do want to live for me and experience what that is like. And in terms of being able to hold those boundaries, I don't think I would have been able to do it by myself. I like to think of myself at this point being a very physically and mentally and emotionally, I'm a very strong woman, but I was not always this way. And being able to have the support of my therapist who was able to coach me through that was huge. And I think a lot of times we think, oh, I can do this alone, or, I can just do this with my partner or with a friend. And maybe you can. I mean, I've had access to some really great friends, Tim, who you've seen on the podcast. Like, I've had some incredible support, but I think there's something to be said about having that outside therapist, that outside person coaching you who is not emotionally connected to anything. And they're really just trying to help guide you without having more of a connection to anything that could be deeper, that people who are, connected closer into your life might be able to infiltrate in a different way. And then once I got to the point where I was just like, fuck it, I'm ready to please Colleen, I had to spend time with myself to realize, well, who is your dangerous woman? Who are you? And I think a lot of times when we enter a point in our life where we're thinking about finding ourselves, we start thinking that we need to potentially have these different experiences. But I'm a really firm believer that we know who we are. I don't think I've ever shared this on the podcast, but I'm a big philosophy nerd and I love Nietzsche. And he says something along the lines of, you are your inner child. And I remember a few years ago thinking to myself, okay, well, who was I as a child? And I was this little adorable weirdo. I remember being 6 and I would climb trees and ride horses. I was so unafraid of everything. I wanted a six-pack. I wanted a six-pack when I was this little kid. And I really wanted a red thong bikini. I remember being on a vacation with my family. We were staying somewhere tropical. And I remember seeing this woman in this red thong bikini. And I was like, Mom, I want one that looks like hers. And my mom was like, no, you're not going to want that looks like hers. But it's interesting because, I'm 33 now. And, I do have the abs. And I do have a red thong bikini. And I'm just like, that's what the 6-year-old wanted. That's what the 6-year-old now has. And it has kind of maybe just sit into all of those other pieces of me as a little kid. I loved gymnastics. I loved pretending I could fly. And then that's one of the reasons why I got into aerial silks, because I wanted to feel like I was flying. And that is also one of the reasons I decided to just wake up one day and say, I guess I'm going skydiving. And in doing all these things that I might not have done in previous years, it's helped me to reconnect to who I was as a little kid. And I believe that all of us, like, we are that child, we are that inner child version of ourselves. And one of the best ways to connect to who we are and what we want is by revisiting that version of ourselves before anybody, was shaming us into thinking, that's not okay, or making us feel like whatever it is we're doing is unacceptable. I remember as a little kid, I was like really into the idea of being like a gypsy or being a witch. And I come from a very religious, conservative family. And I remember being told, like, witchcraft, like all that kind of stuff, that is not okay. And it's so, so funny. I was talking to my mom recently, and I was like, I don't fully remember how this came up, but I was like, yeah, I'd love to stay over for like a night or two. And my mom was like, well, you're welcome to stay in my house, but like, you can't bring that witchy stuff inside. And I was just like, what the fuck is she talking about? And she was like, your tarot cards, they're not welcome in my house. And I was like, don't worry, mom, I'll keep the tarot cards in the car. Think like, if you are somebody who is trying to connect to who you be, like, you've set the boundaries, you're done people pleasing, you want to like embrace this dangerous woman version of yourself, dangerous man version of yourself. You just want to be, you want to be authentically you. I think a really great place to start is in connecting to who were you as a child and leaning into that and seeing how it feels. And for me, every time I lean into these childlike things, I refer to my inner child as Coco. If you're really close to me, I let close friends, if I'm the aunt to any of my friends' kids, I'm Aunt Coco. But when I lean into Coco, inner child version of Colleen, I realize, like, wow, that bitch knew how to have fun. And it makes me feel very in tune with myself and alive and good and authentic. And I think that's something that is such a helpful piece for anybody who's ready to fully embrace this part of themselves, this part where you are uncontrollable to anyone but you. And sometimes I like to think to myself, if I have a day and I don't need to work and I don't need to see anyone, how do I want to spend this day? What would I do? Because a lot of times, especially in the past, even now, occasionally, when I'm with other people, I'm just like, well, what do you want to do? Because my personality is very like go with the flow. But if you were just by yourself and you could do anything, what would you do? I think that's really telling of, where you should be, where you should focus attention, what you should try, what experiences could light you up. Sometimes when we're around other people, again, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but the tendency to just people please or the tendency to make other people feel comfortable, like, that can be really nice. And like, I'm not dismissing that at all, but in order to feel really connected to yourself and truly feel like you are just, living in the moment, something that I believe is the reason it's called the present, like past, present, future. The reason it's called the present is because life is a gift. And for me, I want to be able to experience all the gifts that life has to offer. And in order to feel like I really am receiving those gifts, it does come down to, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your time? What do you want to experience? What would feel like a gift? And the more I've been able to lean into that, the more I feel this sense of being, authentically me, uncontrollable, dangerous, if you will. And I think that's just something so special and magical that everybody has access of connecting to. I read a book called Lilith by Nikki Mamery a little over a year ago. And there's a line in that book saying, you are all capable of being your own gods and goddesses, not because you are the higher power, but because we all have the ability to own our personal power. Now, as we wrap this episode up, I just want to remind you that as important as it is to build a strong body, it is also just as important to build a strong sense of self. And the only way you do that is by starting to listen to that voice within. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Dangerous Woman podcast. Make sure to subscribe and give us a follow, not just here on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, anywhere where you are consuming podcasts, but also check us out on YouTube.